All right, welcome back everyone to the latest episode of Deep Dive. Today kasama po natin si very good friend of mine, the greatest historian, Vicente Rafael. I'm just kidding. You had a double. Parang si Walden, sabi ko, the greatest sociologist. Parang, kamusta? How are you, Vicente, for joining us? Thank you very
Uh,
much. Thank you. I know it's
no,
early morning.
yeah, yeah, no, as usual, it's good to be with you, and it's nice to be with your audience. Hello, everybody.
So
Yeah.
for now, they're just gonna hear from you, but they're gonna have the perfect visuals, especially your kind of a postmodern French, like philosopher look. We're gonna like let me also do my Italian look. Okay, so I think we
Uh,
got we got it going, my friend. Okay,
okay.
um, Vicente, let me tell you this, and I'm not saying this because it's Christmas and we're good friends, but honestly. There's so many intellectuals in our circles and beyond, and overlapping or not, that I can relate to on so many levels. But one of the things I always appreciated with you, Vicente, is like you're among very few people out there who's not trained in philosophy, but I can relate to, and I'm also not trained in philosophy, like talking about Foucault and Derrida and all of those weirdo French people to make
Mhm.
sense out of politics. And of course, that's because your previous book, I know you have a new book project on Indonesia. We can talk about that, but your previous book on making sense out of Duterte through the kind of a Foucauldian, postmodern, and post-colonial literature, I found that very eclectically interesting. I'm not sure about your other colleagues. Did other people appreciate what you did, Vicente? I know marami tayong mga bashers.
Yeah.
You feel your other colleagues appreciated what you were trying to do with Duterte there?
Yeah, no, I think so. The reviews of the book, was starting with yours, of course, have always tended to be very positive. I haven't gotten a negative review of the book, and it's written in such a way that people can take a lot of things from it, and they can leave behind, the sort of more philosophical underpinnings of the book if they want to, and just deal with the historical and the sociological aspects of the book. So. I think the book on the most part has been okay. I mean, in terms of like being able to find an audience and being able to make sense of the Duterte uh, uh, era, especially around the question of the extrajudicial killings and so forth. So yeah, I think it's been okay. Certainly not as popular as Patricia Evangelista's book, which of course is a completely different genre in which I respect and admire a lot too. So yeah,
I obviously Patricia has made a huge contribution in terms of the descriptive part. What we have been
yeah,
trying to do
yeah,
in our
yeah,
little ways is the analytical part. And
yeah,
to be honest, with all the praise I have for Patricia's work, a part of me felt how I wish she kind of built on the analytical part, because it's not like no other books were written on analyzing Duterte.
yeah,
I've always found
yeah,
this we're all Duterte kind of lousy, to be honest, from an analytical
yeah.
sense, but from a descriptive sense, from a journalistic, courageous sense, obviously, all kudos to, again, one of my peers back in the day did in debate society. So it's a small world. Vicente, I just finished the first episode of the 100 Years of Solitude adaptation, so I'm still in a magical realist point of view. But
Yeah, I'm in the middle of it right now. Yeah,
don't
it's
ruin
really
it, my
good.
friend.
Yeah, yeah,
Not
yeah,
not bad. I mean, in fairness, I mean, like, wow, I'm
yeah.
so
It's
impressed.
good.
I
Yeah,
was
it's good.
I was probably in the same room when I was reading it 15 years ago. So like all the memories were coming back. Vicente, I want to ask you, why did you choose that perspective to make sense out of Duterte? Was there, I don't want to say pathological, no, but was there something exceptional about Duterte that you felt you had to really approach it from a completely different angle, right?
Well, all my ratings have always been about, starting from my first book on contracting colonialism with Christianity. I mean, they've always been concerned with trying to understand the construction of power and the deconstruction of power. In other words, how is it that power regimes are made, whether it's colonial Spain, colonial America, occupying power of Japan, whatever, and then the post-war republic. How is it that power is constructed, and how is it that power is simultaneously undermined? So that's always been my approach. And if you want to call that Foucaultian, that's fine, because certainly that's what he does. Or if you want to call that Derridian, that's fine. Although I don't, as you know from my writings, I don't place the theoretical sort of front and center, but it's always between the lines and usually in the footnotes. Now, why did I choose that perspective? Did I think Duterte was exceptional? Uh, in some respects, he stood out to the extent that he said a lot of things that people were thinking but didn't want to say aloud, right? And this is not a new insight. Some people have said this, of course, right? He belonged to typically, like many politicians, he belonged to a provincial elite. Made his base in Davao, and found his way to reach the national peaks of power through a combination of bravado as well as a certain kind of support from other elites, uh, and of course he came into the national scene at a particular moment when the candidacy of a lot of other people seemed weak at that time. And people gravitated to him as someone, as a strong man, as Filipinos tend to do. They tend to appreciate, they tend to support strong men as a way of solving a whole host of the country's problems. So in that sense, his rise to power, I would say, is not so much exceptional, but contingent, right? It was contingent on a lot of other conditions. The timing of his rise to power is very important. But was he any different from other politicians, Filipino politicians we've seen? I don't think so. I think it was in that sense quite typical and unexceptional in that sense. Yeah.
So conjunctural, that's your read of him. He
Yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah, of
yeah,
course, of course.
yeah.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
so you called him a sovereign trickster. The trickster
yeah,
part is very interesting to me. The
yeah,
jester, the trickster, the evil clown. I mean, all of those elements. Obviously, you are a scholar of Southeast Asia. The case of Indonesia comes to my mind, about the Oppenheimer documentary
yeah,
about the
yeah, yeah,
genocide that
yeah,
happened. And they were interviewing these guys to engage in that genocidal campaign against communists and
yeah,
Chinese Indonesians. And they were kind of tricksters too, right? They
yeah,
would
yeah, yeah, yeah,
they would use this kind of very dark humor and kind of in a very multifarious way,
yeah.
refractory way. Um, did the Indonesian case, I mean, are there other comparative cases that help you understand to locate itong yung pagka-trickster ni Duterte? Is this a
Yeah.
subculture? Is what's going on there?
Yeah, well, there's of course there's Trump, which I read about Trump in as a coda in chapter 4 of the book. I think he's very much a kind of sovereign trickster. Uh, and then there are others. I mean, you think of Silvio Berlusconi in Italy, and other fascist figures. You could argue Mussolini was a sovereign trickster of some sort, where you use the resources of popular culture and folklore and so forth, where you can, as it were, develop a certain kind of style, a certain kind of persona. Uh, Humor plays a very important role. It's a way of connecting to people. It's a way of, what I call projecting a community of conviviality, right? Where everyone's like laughing at the same joke, no matter how awful that joke is. I mean, to us, it seems awful, but to his audience, obviously, they're very much amused by it. So, and it comes to a point where it's very difficult to tell, is he joking or is he serious or is he doing both, right? So humor becomes a route towards projecting, once again, power, and forcing people, as it were, to laugh with him. And laughter then becomes a site for um, injecting a certain kind of terror and a certain kind of fear. And I'm sure you've seen this in other people, no? Is he joking or is he serious or is he actually going to kill me? So Yeah, so I found that very fascinating, the concept of a trickster. And incidentally, the figure of the trickster is extremely widespread in Southeast Asia. So it's not just in the Philippines, it's all of Southeast Asia, right? And it's always a male figure. I've never seen any references to a female figure, right? So the trickster is, as I said, extremely popular in Southeast Asia. Yeah.
That's perfect because I think as soon as we talk about Sara Duterte, because my description of Sara Duterte, she's a poor copy of an original poor, right? It's like so we'll talk about that because Sara doesn't have the trickster element, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah,
cut
yeah,
short to
yeah.
Sara and her weakness because the weakness is coming out, right?
Yeah.
So I'll ask point blank. You know, people like me, I use the more conventional, essentially far right populism. Walden openly called him a fascist, original fascist. Randy David kind of circuitously used the term Dutertismo, which of course kind of has intimations of fascism.
Mhm.
What is your read of him from an historical standpoint compared to other Filipino leaders, other regional leaders? Is he a fascist, or is fascism a kind of a Western phenomenon? Is it a historically specific phenomenon? Because the term has been so over deployed and abused that it has lost its luster and its
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, I'm agnostic about the term fascism, right? I have no objections to people referring to him as fascism. I mean, there are perfectly good arguments to talk about that. But as some people have said, if you say fascism, you have to situate it, right? Fascism is always situated. It's always contingent. You need to talk about its local and its national particularities, right? So situated fascism, I'm okay with that. But I prefer the term authoritarianism. I think authoritarianism speaks much better in the case of the Philippines. And authoritarianism allows you to think about a particular leader in relation to the larger social and cultural context in which he's operating. So, for example, I don't only speak about Duterte as an authoritarian figure, I speak about the entire class that supports it, mainly oligarchs, upper classes, ruling class, as an oligarchy. I mean, what we have in the Philippines is an oligarchic authoritarian structure, right? It's very difficult to get into that class. And once you're in that class, however you get into it, mahirap lumabas. You have to play the game, no matter how honest and
Like a mafia.
full.
It's like a
Yeah,
mafia.
exactly right, exactly right. So and in fact, maybe the mafia is it's a much better sort of way of talking about Duterte and all the other leaders in the Philippines. So yeah, yeah. So there are many different descriptors. I'm not saying that they're wrong or they're right. All I'm saying is that I think these descriptions are appropriate for certain context and maybe not so useful for others. Whatever works, okay lang sa akin. So
So, Vicente, tanungin kita, sa ating kasaysayan, if there's gonna be a lineage of Duterte-like figures,
mhm.
how are you gonna trace it? I mean, let's start. I mean, is Aguinaldo a Duterte-like figure? A
Yeah,
kind of
I mean,
Duterte figure? If we are gonna start with him.
yeah, I mean, some people have even gone back and said, oh, that the figure of the Datu is already a foreshadowing of an
The
authoritarian
judge, the
figure.
executioner, the alpha
Right,
male,
yeah,
everything. Yeah.
exactly. And then Al McCoy has written an essay where, he traces it back to Quezon, and forward, Quezon, Marcos, Duterte. But I mean, you can look at all the Philippine presidents and say, oh, to a certain extent, they've all adopted a certain kind of authoritarian stance. Even someone as supposedly benevolent and kind as Pinoy, right, has of course exerted a certain kind of authoritarian force. I think the position of the chief executive and commander in chief compels you to take on this certain kind of authoritarian stance, and it's that's just the way the political structure is made to operate. Right, the buck stops here. Somebody makes the final decision, and so on. Some presidents are much more democratic, or much more open in the process of making these decisions. But ultimately, they're the ones that exerts the force, right?
Isn't that interesting? Because I don't know if you agree with the reading, but one of the problems we have with Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is that he's deliberately and temperamentally an anti-Marcos in a sense that he constantly tries to avoid confrontation. He constantly
Mhm.
tries to avoid to come off as authoritarian, right? Now, Lelo's theory is that he's bounded still by the EDSA constitutional order, ironically. My argument is precisely because he wants to rehabilitate his name. He knows the shadow of the reputation. And then he knows na mutually assured destruction yan if he goes with the Dutertes or against others. So if you look at it in a weird way, BBM is the most affable. It's like president. We have correct us. I mean, you're the historian between the two of us, but from a political scientist point of view, I look at it it's like, yeah, he's kind of like the most affable, least defensive, least pecan. I mean, you mentioned some of the
Mhm.
more nice guys. I know they were pecan back in the day from my own.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like they would call you. They would it's like they didn't like what you wrote. Like it's like BBM, he just takes the punches and he's just okay. What's going on with BBM? What is your read of him? Is it timidity? I mean, the term they use is puting, right? Like we call him tigre, right? Like from the north. I mean, but his critics call him kuting, right? So like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
what's this kuting
yeah.
phenomenon with BBM? How do you read that? It's
You know,
weird.
he was, I was in LaSalle with him, Green Hills. He was one grade below me. And I used to remember him, he would play soccer, right? And his style of playing soccer was completely passive. I mean, it looked like he wasn't really that interested in it because he wasn't interested in athletic competition. And my sense from stories that you hear is, he's a party boy. He likes to party. He doesn't, he likes to sit back and watch Netflix or whatever, with his kids. He just enjoys relaxing and he
Ant-Man, right?
enjoys,
He watched
huh? Yeah,
Ant-Man before he ran.
yeah, right, right. At one point in his life, I don't know if he still does it. He liked to get high. He liked to kick back, these are
Whoa,
not the
whoa,
true.
whoa! We sent the whoa, whoa, bro! Don't do that.
Oh, and it's true. I mean, it's not just anecdotal. I mean, there's all kinds of first-hand sort of witnesses to his proclivities, as it were. You should hear the stories about Oxford, etc. But anyway, so that's
Wait,
my
wait,
experience.
wait, wait, wait. To the degree that you can share, can you tell me a little bit about Oxford? Because I watch his, I mean, sorry, I didn't watch directly, but he has some vlogs about Oxford, and then he just talks about, Isaiah Berlin was here. This is the Great Hall of this. Medyo ganon yung conversation niya.
Yeah, yeah. No, one of my colleagues was in Oxford with him, and there's stories about him getting drunk and driving around Oxford and lying down on the street, and so forth. But as I said, all of this is really all about how he always liked to party. I don't think he ever took his life seriously. And if it wasn't for his mother, I don't think he'd want to be president. He's just not, personality wise, he's just not given to commanding, as it were. He's more given to following, right? So, and in this case, he was following his mother, who wanted him to say the name, which is probably why Amy is so resentful
Bitter.
because
Yeah.
because she feels that she should have been the one, right? That she was much more serious and much more intelligent, and there's some truth to that. Yeah, so if Duterte was a sovereign trickster, BBM was maybe a sovereign party boy.
Um, Playboy or party boy. I mean, I've heard things from different ambassadors, Latin American ambassadors, like,
Yeah, yeah,
whoa, 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 this is like Macondo. Like these are
yeah,
like
exactly.
Macondo stories.
Wow.
Don't tell me shit.
Yeah, yeah. I wish Nick Joaquin was still around. Boy, he could really, write something about BBM.
Well, I
Yeah,
hope we can piece things together. But thanks to you. I mean, this was I mean, I know your LaSalle background and all that, but I didn't know you were like just 1 year apart and watching play football. I mean, that's so conyo.
yeah,
He's such a
yeah.
conyo.
Yeah. And he was always surrounded by bodyguards and everything. It's very amusing, So yeah,
So the Kuting hypothesis makes sense. It's like,
absolutely,
it's chill.
absolutely.
It's chill.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I mean, his wife, right? Lisa, I mean, she's the powerhouse. She's the one that pushes him, right? Which is why everybody targets her because they know. I mean, Sarah Duterte is not going to waste her time, going after BBM. She goes after Lisa. So,
So what's the chismis naman about the cousin, Ferdinand Martin Romualdez? He was at Cornell. You went to the same school.
Yeah,
And
but I didn't know him. I mean, he was in
yeah.
a different planet. So yeah.
But I heard he was, he knew how to play the game, meaning not make too much noise, not stand out, just, keep his head down, get through the, through the whole process and all. So I don't know. I mean, I heard, so it makes sense, right? He has a cousin who's kind of smart and did his due diligence, a wife that is quite, knows what to do. So essentially,
And a mother. Don't forget the
I,
mother. Yeah.
yeah, the original. I always tell my
She's the
American.
OG. She's
She's
the
the OG.
OG.
I said, before there was Kardashian, there was Imelda Marcos. I mean, we're so lucky walang YouTube nung panahon ni Imelda. She would have been the biggest influencer on earth, right? She would
Oh
have been
yeah.
Mr. Beast on steroids. But going back to this, there is, however, an interesting episode in history, right? I mean, first of all, we have a lot of cases of party boys. I mean, I was just, reading about the last hours of Assad, right? And one of his son, and one of his brothers who died. Or if you watch Narcos, right? You have all of these stories of these bratty sons who
Mhm.
overcompensate, and then when they're in power, they go berserk.
Mhm.
That's not what we see here.
Mhm.
Though historically, there's also another interesting thing. So now we're playing the psychological game, right? The other thing is, aside from overcompensation tendency we see with brats who end up in positions of power or on the throne, yung isa pa is, ano yung kwento talaga na naka-camouflage siya at nag-special forces siya sa army training and all of that? At yung kwento nung iba
Yeah.
na nung sa mga huling araw ni Marcos Seniors, siya pa yung hawk. A friend called him the last hawk, right? That
Mhm.
actually siya yung parang anak ni Assad na babarilin mo yung mga tao na yan, don't give up. So, was that an aberration? Was that an overcompensation moment that withered away as soon as he was back into exile in Hawaii? What is your read of that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it could be that. It could certainly, yeah. But my impression is that, faced with exile, I think people were the Marcos family is probably scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. Packing their Pampers bags with jewels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And that I think in the case of Bong Bong, he was probably trying to make a show of force, trying to tell the world, hey, we're still here, we're not going anywhere, blah blah blah. And of course, that never worked. In Hawaii, from what I understand from reading FBI files that did a lot of surveillance on the Marcos family, Bong Bong was a major conduit for the money. He would be the one to. I think the FBI nickname for him was Swallow. Like the swallow, like the bird.
Like, wow.
Yeah,
So was it
and
was the bagman. Oh my.
he would make the phone calls. He would arrange for arms shipment, because there were a couple of attempts to launch a coup, and he would make arrangements for shipment of arms to the Philippines, which never happened. They tried to do it, but it never occurred. So he was doing that, and I think he was just trying to find a place for himself while they were in exile. And meanwhile, all the attention was on Imelda because she would go shopping, she would make these strange statements, and then of course there was the trial in New York where she was very much the center of attention, and going around with all the New York jet setters, including Trump, at that time. So yeah, yeah. So
I
so I
always
think that
that New York Society picture of Trump and Imelda next to each other. And
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think the rest of the family, my impression was that they were strangely marginalized while they were in Hawaii. Uh, and in fact, I was in Hawaii recently, and we went out to Makiki Heights where they were exiled. And it's a very isolated area of Hawaii. It's all the way on top, round top. You get a nice panoramic view of the city, etc. But it's not like in the center of anything. And so I think their experience of exile was an experience of relative isolation. And I'm surprised no one has ever written a book about that. The Marcos in exile. I mean, I think that's a book that should be written, uh, and to see how they use their exile as a way of preparing for a return. Because by 92, Imelda was
91.
back.
By
91,
91, yeah.
yeah, yeah, Imelda was back. And that wouldn't have been possible unless, number one, they had won the New York case, right? Number two, Marcos was already dead. So he wasn't calling the shots anymore because he was dead, right? And number three, things had changed in the Philippines, such that FVR had allowed Imelda to come in. And in fact, I have a really terrific picture of Leela's mom, the former Senator Letty Shahani, yeah, meeting her at the airport, right? And sitting beside her in the most foul-looking face, putting on this, oh yeah.
Gross, gross.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the exile, the history of their exile in Hawaii, uh, may have been formative, and it would have been great for someone to
So
actually
we have
dig
absolutely the
into
same
that.
reading. That's exactly my. I'm thinking about actually a
Mhm,
book about the return of the Marcoses. I think both of us had the piece immediately mine on Journal of Democracy, the return of Marcoses. So the not the missing part, but I think something happened, but because his father
mhm,
passed away. It was a
mhm.
luxurious, but at the same time isolated and painful exile. And I think
Yeah.
that's where you had the essentially the crystallization of a kind of a mindset that brought him eventually back into power with the biggest
Oh
man.
yeah, yeah,
This kind of
yeah,
a
yeah.
overly cautious, very systematic, self-constrained. Let's not go megalomaniac like mommy and daddy. Let's play this safe, and it has worked for him. Except
Yeah,
no longer, right? And now I
yeah,
want to
yeah,
ask you
yeah,
about
yeah,
Sarah because this is the irony for BBM. His strategy of attrition warfare, let's just call it for that. Let's just call
yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
war of position. I'll use the Gramsci word. This war of position of his really worked so well, right? So
Mhm, mhm.
they build up from their bailiwick back to the national level,
Right,
YouTube and
right.
fake news channels. They made the revisionist project increasingly mainstream. They waited
They
for
they they pl- they played the long game. They
they
played the
played the
long
long
game. They
game
were they were so
really,
good
really
at that. Yeah,
smartly.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And then things go crazy, which is not
Mhm,
again totally unsurprising because I don't know if you remember Prebus, the chief of staff of Trump. He said in
mhm,
his
mhm.
first term, a cabinet was like a zoo without fence, and if you put
Yeah.
if you put predators next to each, there's gonna be blood, right? Like, so I see the unity as a zoo without a fence, and so eventually this thing happened. What everyone was foreseeing for quite some time. So, what is your read right now with this Duterte versus Marcos drama? Because
Yeah.
a while ago you kept on saying the role of the mom, Imelda, the role of the wife, the bitterness of the sister. Well, when it comes to Sara Duterte, she's also not operating in a vacuum. If anything, it's the dad who's the Karen, right?
Yeah.
He's the one who launched the war essentially
Mhm,
early this year by openly calling BBM things that you're telling us. Like, this guy is like a cocaine addict. He has to be
mhm,
taken out. So actually, Sarah, I think, would have preferred also a more BBM way of just keeping it quiet on an even kill and wait it out until 2028 maybe. But the
mhm,
dad really forced the case. And it's not like her brothers are paragons of sobriety, if I can put it that way. So that's an interesting dynamic too here, right? How
mhm,
the other veto players are influencing this clash, right?
mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. The strategy changed somewhere from trying to launch a coup, right, against Corey because there's so many coups and so forth. And God only knows how much of those coups they were behind, to, as you say, going local, building up their local bailiwick and working their way back into the system, so to speak, exploiting the system for what it can do to them. Plus the fact that they were helped. And let's not forget this. People tend to forget this. They had so much money. I mean, the money that had been plundered is certainly behind their ability to get back into the national scene, right? And so much of the political work they were doing was trying to sort of compel people to forget about that, to forget about the theft, to forget about the torture, to forget about the violence, right? So they were, to a certain extent, quite successful in doing that. Uh, with Sarah Duterte, I don't know. I mean, the thing about she's a very interesting character, right? Uh, I should say. First of all, she's what I would refer to as a phallic woman, right? She's a phallic woman in the sense that, I mean, she doesn't.
He wants to
Just,
outman the man. Yes.
that's right. I mean, she has obviously quite a bit of testosterone in her system, right? And like you never hear about the husband. Where the hell is the husband? He's completely overshadowed by her, right? And so she's managed to, in some ways, succeed her father, uh, and put a sort of somewhat feminine face to it, but nonetheless, she's just as tough, and she's just as unforgiving, I think, as her father, right? Uh, and I think that the BBM, the unity team, was bound to fail. It was temporary, it was contingent, it was conjunctural. And once BBM was in place, I think the move was on to make sure that Sarah didn't interfere. That's why she didn't get military. She didn't get Secretary of Defense. She got education instead, right?
Which she
And
turned into a defense department with all the
yeah,
confidential funds and all.
yeah, that's
Insane.
that that's right. That's right. And Congress, just sort of rallied around BBM and tried to get rid of Sarah, right? Which is they're in the process of doing. I mean, I don't know if the impeachment process will work, but certainly it's placed a huge sword over her head, right? In a way that never happened with the father. I mean, the father was much better at controlling things, right? So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen,
Well, speaking
right?
of the sword, I mean, are there many countries? I mean, I've been asking everyone, right? Um, Marami bang bansa kung saan yung vice-presidente ay sasabihin niya, parang nagde-dream team ako na pupuguran ko tong presidente na to or may kinontrata ako na assassin na yayariin na to pag niyari ako. Like, how
No,
many,
that's
I mean, Latin America, I cannot think of even in Middle East,
mm,
maybe. I mean, like, this is crazy. This is like Saddam when he was the vice president threatening him. This is crazy.
yeah, no, I mean, it is crazy, and the reason she can do that is she knows she can get away with it. She knows, and she can use it to her advantage. By saying that, she projects an image of herself as tough, as ready to rumble, as it were. And if BBM was made of different stuff, first thing he would have done was to arrest her, put her in jail, maybe even have her killed for subversion. But that didn't happen. She's still out there, right? So again, she was probably testing the waters. She was probably trying to figure out how far can I go? How much can I push this? And she's in that sense, it's worked. Right? She's been very successful doing it. So who knows? But it does give her a fighting chance for the next election, right? By being able to say things like that. So yeah.
So you think that BBM is just gonna, like just gonna muddle through and kick the can down the road and just wait this out, this storm out, and Sarah will just wait for momentum to shift in her favor. Because as we speak, her numbers are really low. Her net
Yeah,
approval is just
yeah,
22%. Her dad
yeah,
had 90% net approval at
yeah,
some point.
yeah,
Only
yeah,
3%. This is insane.
yeah. No, I think BBM is going to let Congress take care of it instead of him doing it. I mean, Congress and as you know, the legislature always moves much slower, right? They're always mired in process, and I think that's what's going to happen. So yeah, yeah.
Baka naman, baka naman, di ba? Malapit na elections, right? That also adds
Okay.
greasy hands to the conversations,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
which
yeah,
which
exactly.
complicates it. Now, going back again to Duterte, what could make him exceptional at some point,
Mhm.
and to a certain degree, maybe people close to him, Bato de la Rosa, who knows, maybe Sara at some point, is the ICC angle. I mean,
Yeah.
this would be really something, right? So, as far as I know, it's only the Myanmar junta leader, a horrible person, and Rodrigo Duterte, who are the two former or current heads of state in Asia
Mhm.
seriously face potential investigation, if not warrants of arrest by ICC. How do you see that from a historical standpoint?
Yeah. Oh, don't forget Netanyahu. I mean,
Oh, it's,
there's a warrant.
well, I mean,
Isn't there?
I say Asia, I kind of separate
I see, I see, I see. Yeah, yeah,
Mediterranean, like, yeah,
yeah.
it's like, and then never mind. When it's like, let's not go there. Okay, let's just say Asians like us, like you and I,
Yeah,
Asians.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think the ICC, if they do come up with a warrant for his arrest, will make some kind of an impact. But BBM has already said that the Philippines will not prosecute Duterte. So I don't know what kind of a difference it would make. He's not likely to leave the country to go anywhere else and risk being arrested. So I think it will be, if you will, a kind of moral victory. for the administration. I mean, for the Filipino people as a whole, if in fact the ICC comes up with a warrant, it's not enforceable. So I don't know what it will amount to. As I said, aside from it being a moral victory, yeah.
I want to go a little bit forward and then we'll go all the way back. So Star Wars style. So the the decline. So what I'm seeing here is a mutual destruction. Para
Mhm,
silang bugbog sarado. Yung mga numero ni BBM ay sobrang baba sa Mindanao. So obviously that's
mhm,
where you see the Mindanao backlash, solid South backlash. Sara's numbers are horrible in Luzon, right? Even in Visayas,
mhm,
she's beginning to bleed. So clearly these two are hurting each other. Um, the one group, and I call them a group, who are benefiting right now is actually the Tulfo brothers. Two
mhm,
brothers are vying for number one in Senate, and Rafi Tulfo, since quarter four of last year, based on some of the surveys unpublished, I know, has been number one to be the next president. How do you
mhm,
understand Tulfoismo? Let's just call it. So obviously Tulfoismo is not EJK, right? That's the
mhm,
one big
mhm,
difference. You never, even Ben
mhm,
Tulfo, the most
mhm,
rambunctious brother, never
mhm,
goes and
mhm,
say kill people. But obviously
mhm,
there's this controversy with their idea of,
mhm,
like publicity, trial by publicity, or some say
mhm,
publicity by
mhm.
trial, right? Like, it goes both. How do you understand the Tulfoismo phenomenon for
Yeah.
21st century Philippines? I mean, this is a
Mhm.
time where the Philippines is the wealthiest it has ever been in terms of per capita income, in terms of middle class population. Of
Mhm.
course, we're far from where we should be, but it's interesting, isn't it?
Well, what makes it interesting is that unlike previous politicians, the Tulfo brothers do not have a provincial bailiwick. So what is their basis? Media. I mean, it's completely about media. Starts with radio. Did they have TV programs? Wala naman,
Yeah,
ano?
Sam, TV5. We're actually
TV,
colleagues on TV5, but they're really strong
okay.
on YouTube. I mean, like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Social media, radio, TV, etc. So here you have a interesting phenomenon where they're not beholden to a local constituency because of their dominance of the media, right? So they are immediately propelled into a national constituency. Wala nang local, puro national na, and the diaspora, right? The Filipinos in the diaspora, of course, listen to them, they're big fans, etc. And they're seen as problem solvers, right? That's their reputation. May problema ka, tawagan mo yung itulfo mo yan. Diba? That's an
it's a
expression,
verb.
itulfo.
Tulfo is a
Yeah,
verb.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So the assumption is that, who needs extrajudicial killings? You can just get the tulfo to sick on these people, right? Call them, etc., humiliate them, have them arrested, etc. So they're seen as these problem solvers. They response is immediate, and so forth. And so people like that. It's a version of the strongman politics, in the case of the tulfos, right? And I think that's one reason why they're very popular. For the same reason that Vic Soto continues to be popular, again because of his media presence, right? So people underestimate that. Robin Padilla, etc., etc. Yeah,
Willie Revilla, man. Yeah, Willie
Willie Revillame, of
absolutely.
course. Yeah, yeah. And so I think that the role of the media has been very important, much more so than local politics in this case. So it's not surprising that they would be up on top of the polls.
Absolutely. I mean, for us, actually, this is belated, right? You would have expected Tulfo
Mhm.
to actually. I think what happened with Tulfo is like, wait, if Duterte can do it, hell, we can do it better, right? We're even more
Yeah,
popular than
yeah,
that guy. So I think that's
yeah,
what's happened, right? From what I hear, even the Kuya Mon, who started it all, saying, wait, bakit kayong tumatapat akong tumakbo? In fact, their problem could be embarrassment of riches, wherein three of them want to run for president in
Oh
20.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's gonna
yeah,
be crazy. It's an
yeah,
interesting. We have never had anything like that. Three family members simultaneously in Senate, none of them from a bailiwick, totally new out of nowhere, quote unquote dynasty. It's a fascinating situation.
yeah,
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 ako,
yeah,
now I'm studying like differences between the brothers, like Ben versus
yeah.
Erwin. Like it now, it's the variations that matter to me.
Yeah, yeah. The other interesting thing to watch are the Villars, right? And again, you have to ask the question, where did the strengths of the Villars come from? If the Tulfo is all about media, Villars, of course, is all about real estate. It's all about business. I mean, they're buying up everything. They're spectacularly wealthy, right? And so all the kids are in the Senate or in Congress, etc. And again, it has nothing to do with local politics. does everything to do with their ability to accumulate capital, social and otherwise. And so if it's not media, it's money, right? And that allows them, like media, it allows them to bypass local constituency and get on the national wavelength right away. So, yeah.
How dare you, Vicente? Sila, according to Cynthia, mayaman kami. Matagal na kami mayor dyan sa Las Piñas. Si mga lolo ko pa. I mean, like, I don't know if you've heard stories. Like, what? I
Yeah.
don't know if this is true. Someone told me this is crazy. Sabi na, may mga times na yung mga bilyar, they come up with like some land title in a government building and sabi na,
Yeah.
sa amin
Yeah.
yan 200 years ago. Like, ganun daw yung mga kwento. So, that's my slight disagreement. They still have, or at least pretensions to that kind of a lineage of old rich in, I don't know, Las Piñas or Parañaque or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. Um,
Yeah.
Now I want to really rewind all the way back, right? Like how did so parang yung episode 1 ng 100, 100 Year of Solitude yung bago siya ma-execute, 'di ba? Yung inisip niya yung begin. So now imagine you are in the eye of Colonel Buendia, right? Like now you're going now inside the eye of Colonel Buendia. Vicente, how did we go from Jose Rizal and that
Mhm.
generation to this, right? How can I mean obviously we can write 10 volumes of books on that. But to the degree that we can make a sensible systematic study,
Mhm.
what was the rot at the core of the apple? Because that's one of the things I appreciate about you because you deconstructed the
Mhm.
revolutionary generation. That there was something really lacking from the very because on the outside, glamorous men of Renaissance men, right? I mean, some would call Rizal the last Renaissance man. Isabella de los Reyes, mi favorito, like another great guy. So how did we go from that level of leadership and generational revolutionary zeal to, let's be honest, laughing stock of democracies, right? The kind of a
Yeah.
fiesta
Yeah.
democracy that makes even Latin America look more respectable than us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for starters, if you want to talk about exceptions, I mean, Rizal was the exception, right? He certainly.
Immediately, that's your way out. Like, oh no, no, no,
Yeah.
isolate Rizal is the guy. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I mean, there were others, of course, who were exemplary, but Rizal was the most exemplary, which is why he, at some point, he broke off from the Filipino community because he thought that they were lazy, they thought they were corrupt, that they weren't doing the work they were supposed to do. So he spent a lot more time in places like Germany, England, and so forth.
And then later
You
in
know,
Dapitan. Yeah.
doing his own thing. And if you read the novels, Noli and Fili, I mean, so much of it was, Father Schumacher used to point this out. So much of it was as much a criticism of the Filipinos as it was of the Spaniards. I mean, he saw colonialism as something that corrupted everybody who was touched by it. And in the end, in the Fili, he has that incredible figure of Simon, who basically says, let's just destroy everything. So the anarchist impulse, right, in Simon, because he felt, oh, there's no way we can save this mother. So uh,
Incorrigible, like irredeemable.
yeah,
That's very interesting because
yeah.
Joaquin discussed that, right? Dun sa
Mhm.
a question of heroes, right? Na
Mhm.
inis si Rizal na purong babaero. Like once they found, kasi di ba they come from conservative schools and then suddenly
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
all
yeah.
this like, alam mo na, di ba? Um,
Right.
right.
Although I have to add, Rizal was not completely exempt from that. If you read the book of Raquel Reyes, Love, Passion, and Patriotism, I mean there was a bordello in Belgium that these Filipino ilustrados loved to frequent, right, including Rizal. So and and they had constant fascination with white women, as you know. So it's not unusual to. He was not
Parang
exempt.
medyo it harkens back. But okay, the reason I'm also okay, I like that you raised that issue because again, one of the things I found interesting with your observation, Vicente, and I don't know, may pagka-Duterte ka rin, no, para sa, like, we'll say things that other academics don't say, right? Like, one of the
Yeah.
things we discussed was, bakit pinapakapal ng bigote ng mga, purong ilustrado nakabigote lahat, diba? Like,
Right, right,
was
right,
there,
right, right.
and then, of course, you went to the case of Juan Luna. Can we discuss
Mhm,
Juan Luna? Because obviously, your works look at, the whole
mhm.
historiography and all. Let's talk about Luna, because some would say he's even more genius than Rizal, except even more, it's like unhinged. So can we talk about Juan Luna? A very interesting character, a
Yeah,
tragic character.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Well, that's true. He was tragic. The thing is, there's two ways of talking about Juan Luna. One is to talk about his work, his art, which is very important, which is very interesting. And then the other is to talk about his life and to think about how the two are related. As you know, Juan Luna was a wife beater. He was a murderer. He was extremely jealous and so forth. Uh,
But wasn't
and
that also related? Because one hypothesis would be, hindi naman overcompensation, but the idea is that through great art, I beat the white man in his own game, and at the same
yeah.
time, let's go post-colonial, right? The internalized insecurity also drove his
Uh-huh.
extreme jealousy, which turned into something totally crazy and murderous, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah. No, no,
there's
exactly,
some
exactly.
connection there. I don't think they're totally unconnected.
No, no, exactly. I mean, and it's possible. And again, I haven't, some people have sort of, tried to do this, but I haven't really seen anybody make a case for connecting the art with the life, right? I mean, there is something about his life which was, he was like many of the illustrados, he was pretty misogynist, right? And then the question is, how did that misogyny creep into his art? I mean, the much recently celebrated Hymeni and Hymen, whatever that I forget the exact title that's in the Ayala Museum that
Hymen or
you
Hymen
know
or something like that. Hymen
yeah,
or
yeah,
Hymen.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and people were extolling its virtues and going crazy about how beautiful it was. But if you look at it
Hey,
closely, it
no, hey,
is,
it was nice. Come on. Don't be nice.
yeah, no, I mean it's a wonderful piece of art, but at the same time, if you did a political reading, which people are not inclined to do, as you know, if you did a political reading of it, you can see how misogynist it was in many ways. And I think this is the case with Luna, and it's not surprising. I mean, I think most of the illustrators were like that anyway. So again, it was that culture, that macho testosterone-filled culture uh, that characterized a lot of the Ilustrados and which they marshaled towards anti-colonial ends, right? Because this was their way of responding to the insults and to the humiliations that they confronted with the Spaniards. I mean, like growing facial hair, for example, was a direct response to, Spanish racists saying, "Oh, Filipinos are so immature they can't even grow hair." Right? They're like children in that sense. So, of course, they did that, and then they engaged in things like fencing and bodybuilding and all kinds of things as a way of responding to the insults of the Spaniards. On the one hand, as I said, their masculinity was a way of sort of harnessing a certain kind of anti-colonial stance. On the other hand, it was the Filipino women who suffered as a result of that, over masculinized culture of the Ilustrados. So,
So
yeah,
so for you, it was a generation of toxic masculinity, and in many ways, it's the genesis of all sorts of different variations and iterations and mutations we're seeing, right? So like Duterte is
yeah,
like the ultimate dark, culmination of this lineage, right? So
yeah,
that's right.
yeah. No, I
Oof.
think I no, I think the misogyny has been, as you say, absolutely toxic. And if one wanted to reform and improve Philippine politics, that's one place to start is to do something about that toxic masculinity and begin to think of the other half of Philippine society, which are the women, right? To bring the women back, right?
The better
And
half,
yeah,
by every
yeah,
indicator, and honestly,
yeah,
and
yeah,
GDP and
exactly.
modern things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So, so what you're saying is that essentially ang sinasabi natin dito is we have put that generation on a pedestal, and that has created a kind of a schizophrenic reality. The reason I'm saying this is that I was just in India, like the other week, and if you look at India, like Jawaharlal Nehru, right? This is a guy who in prison writes, I don't know, like multi-volume world history stuff from complete,
hmm,
memory, right? I mean, if you look at the kind of elite, Brahmin elite India has, right? Impressive, incredibly impressive people, right? The first one to win a Nobel prize in literature was from the subcontinent, right? Um, and yet you can see the gap between that Brahmin class, that incredible, impressive class, and I don't mean it literally Brahmin. I mean I can talk about Ambedkar, for instance, who came from a lower caste. And then the reality of India, very feudalistic, very unequal, and all. In a sense, I see the Philippines kind of also replicating that. No, you have these amazing people, world-renowned people, especially like Rizal and all. But for some reason, there was never a kind of a movement, a kind of a young Turks kind of a movement. And I'm not romanticizing the young Turks. They did horrible
Mhm.
things, including genocide against Armenians, whatever. But like yun yung parang wala tayong yung locomotive of
Wow.
modernization. We don't have a modernizing elite for some reason. Is it also because of the trauma of immediately, being tossed from the collapsing Spanish Empire to the American Empire? Was that also exceptionally? Because I read it as a psychic wound, right? Like there are not many countries out there that they go against one imperial power. The next thing you know, they're like tossed aside to another one, right? And then they have to
Yeah.
start from scratch. It's very humiliating. And then all the
Yeah.
language you use that put you in positions of, we can talk about taverna and all. And then suddenly now you have to learn English. And you have to start from scratch essentially in certain ways, right? So, sometimes I even imagine how would have Rizal adjusted. I mean, I know he knew some English, but how would they have adjusted? Like not many of even our neighbors went through that double colonial transition at such a
Mhm.
juncture of historical consciousness, right? So again, in that sense, I find Philippines exceptionally wounded. Although I
Mhm.
don't
Mhm.
want to, again, I know it sounds like we're playing the victim, but I think that's fair. Not many countries had
Yeah.
that experience.
No, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, the revolution against Spain was extremely bloody, right? And the Spaniards, retaliated with horrible, horrible means, the torture, exile, massacres, etc., etc. And then when and what's amazing about that is the Filipinos did not launch a vengeful war. I mean, there was some of that. There are accounts of friars, for example, being thrown into a public cage in the middle of town and people being encouraged to sort of, insult and spit on them and everything. But other than that, there was none of that horrible race war that the Spaniards were afraid were going to happen. In fact, if anything, Filipinos tended to be rather genial towards their Spanish captives. Too much of that hospitality trait, I guess, occurred. And then when the Americans came, first of all, there was initial period of friendship and congenial relationships with the Americans, and then the sudden betrayal, with Manila, the mock battle of Manila, and Filipinos being pushed aside and so forth. So the full weight of Anglo-Saxon racism, as it were, fell on the Filipinos, forced to retreat to Malolos, etc., etc. And I think the succeeding Filipino-American War was again terribly, terribly violent, exterminatory. Some people have described it as an exterminatory war. Uh, and you're right, there was an incredible sort of trauma experienced by people during this war. Uh, but what was remarkable was the way in which a lot of this was repressed and eventually swept aside. So very few people really talk about the Filipino-American War, and those who do tend to minimize. They tend to minimize the violence, except some. I mean, there have been some really interesting books that have been written on the horrible, horrible consequences of the Filipino-American War. But I think by and large, thanks again to the work of Filipino Ilustrados, right? There was a very hasty reconciliation with the Americans. I mean, there was still a lot of hostility, of course, the undercurrent of hostility that ran through the American occupation and that the Americans were very afraid of. I mean, so much of US policy in the Philippines was constructed in view of the possibility of inciting rebellion and uprisings among Filipinos all the way up to the 1930s. And, any casual reader of Philippine history during that period will note that uprisings never ceased, right? There are always local revolts, there are always peasant rebellions, all the way up to, the most spectacular one, the Sactalista revolt in the 1930s, right? So Americans were very afraid of that, this continuing resentment and hostility from the Filipinos. But for the most part, I think the Ilustrados were very successful in putting a lot of that stuff down, right? Americans didn't have to do that much. It was really the Ilustrados who took care of business, as it were, right? But what's interesting is how,
They
uh,
shepherded the process. Yeah,
yeah, no, exactly, because the Ilustrados realized that if these rebellions were successful, their own power was going to be endangered, right? So it was very much a colonial Ilustrado that governed the Philippines, right? As Ruby Paredes and others have described, it was a colonial democracy that you had. And it was this colonial democracy that continued clear up through, the Japanese occupation and the Republic, and arguably continues to this day, right? So yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's a great way of segueing to the final part of our discussion because yun nga inisip ko bakit
Mhm.
pag titignan mo yung Pilipinas, exceptionally, again, I hate, I don't want to overdo it, but why is the left so weak in the Philippines, right? That's one
Good
question.
question. Good
Right.
question.
Why
Yeah.
is the state
Yeah.
so weak also in the Philippines? Like both the state is weak and the left is weak, right?
Hmm.
Because we had
Hmm.
other permutations in other region whereby other part of Southeast Asia whereby at some point the left was decimated but the state was strengthened, right? Or the
Yeah.
left and
Yeah.
the state are in the Philippines like wala. It's like the left is so weak and the state is so weak. So that
Hmm.
means there's just something incredibly durable with the liberal or pretentiously liberal oligarchy or
Hmm.
colonial
Hmm.
Anglophone oligarchy, right? I mean, that's
Hmm.
really the outstanding feature of our political system, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, I think the contests between state power and its opponents, whether you want to call it left or something else, liberal, whatever, that's ongoing. And certainly with Quezon, Quezon was a key figure in trying to strengthen the state with American help and trying to put down the left, right? Magsaysay was another key figure in doing that. The others like Quirino and so forth were relative failures. They couldn't do it in the aftermath of the Japanese occupation and the demands of Reconstruction. And then you have Marcos. I think Marcos was, I mean, came close to succeeding in both
State building,
projects
and, you know,
of strengthening the state and then putting down the left, right? But of course, Marcos was bedeviled by cronyism, corruption, and various other things that just, and then his own physical weakness that just wouldn't work. And the left itself made some key mistakes. I mean, the thing about the left is, once again, there's this book by Joseph
Scalise. Yeah,
Scalise.
we had him.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah,
Scalici, but Scalise. Yeah, we had him on
yeah,
this show, the drama of dictatorship. Yeah, we had him twice
yeah,
on this
yeah,
show, 4 hours.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, if you've read his book, if you've spoken to him, you can see when it's many reasons why the left is so weak. And yeah, yeah, I've always remarked on this is that we have the longest running Maoist rebellion in the Philippines, and yet unlike other places where they've had communist uprisings, there hasn't been a single theoretical work by a Filipino Marxist that
Interesting.
has had that has had any impact in the world scene, right? I mean, like you don't have a Gramsci, you don't have any of these sort of writers on the left, possibly except Walden Bello. I mean, Walden Bello, and he's not really. He was with the
Yeah, but
party
Walden
years
is
ago.
he's an international political figure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
He's
yeah,
embedded like Gramsci really in the Italian experience a
yeah.
lot. That's
That's
also
right.
a good example. Also, a lack of
Yeah,
a kind of a country-specific theorization. No offense to Jose
that's
Marichan.
right.
I mean, the guy tried, but it's nothing close to
Yeah, yeah,
where we should.
yeah,
He's a very kind
yeah.
of
So
yeah.
yeah, and so I mean, people on the left will disagree with this, and this characterization of the weakness of the left. But yeah, totoo naman eh. They never really got that far, And and to this day, I mean, they're, with the death of Joma and all the other sort of major leaders, I don't know if they have any clout anymore. On the other hand, it cannot be doubted that the left has had a major influence in terms of educating the youth, especially in UP, right? In terms of infusing them with what I call a certain vocabulary of resistance, right?
Sensibility. Sensibility.
Yeah, a certain sensibility and a certain vocabulary of resistance, such that so much of Filipino nationalism, or at least a certain kind of Filipino nationalism that comes out of places like UP, is imbued with a certain kind of Marxist left-wing discourse, right? The death of Dodong Nemenso, which is now being widely
Yes.
mourned and so forth, is an example of that. Even those who resist the left cannot but fall back on a certain kind of leftist analysis and leftist discourse. And so that is a tribute. That is a tribute to their power and continuing influence, right? So yeah.
Intellectual hegemony to a certain degree. I mean, if I
Yeah,
get
to a certain degree,
yeah.
which is both a strength and a as you want to, doon pa rin, you still have to fall back on that leftist discourse. So yeah, and it's interesting how it spreads to the diaspora. I mean, like for example, here
Oh
at the
yeah.
where I teach at the University of Washington, and you go to Berkeley and you go to UCLA. I mean, many of the students who have never been to the Philippines, talk about, oh, bureaucrat capitalism and imperialism and feudalism, and you point out, the Philippines is not a feudal country. They go,
The
what?
comprador. The
Yeah,
comprador
yeah,
theory. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Philippine Society and Revolution is still the basic reading for many of these student activists. And so you get a sense of how there is that continuing legacy that's
Yeah.
still in circulation. So yeah,
No, I mean, I think Benedict Anderson's favorite university in the region was UP, right? I mean, he had a lot to say about it. He loved UP,
sure,
right? He found no
sure.
parallel to that with all due respect to other great institutions. That's
No,
why
no, no. That's right.
Leloy had that, like he had this piece on Diliman consensus, right?
Yeah,
Particularly
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Diliman pa, di ba? Of all UP.
yeah,
Talagang yun ang pinakapasaway daw eh.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, 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 yeah.
Now, Vicente, moving forward, last part of our discussion, because I would love to pick up on this one. We have, where we leave off later on. But where do you see things going? Because don't you see a systemic deadlock down the road? I mean, I was with Justice Carpio, who's not necessarily a man of sensationalist. I mean, everyone can, but his argument essentially was, if we don't make this work within the existing constitutional coordinates, crackpots, RevGov people are gonna make some crazy moves and take
Mhm,
advantage of this Marcos-Duterte, drama, whatever you want to call it, right?
mhm,
And at the same time, for all the progress the Philippines is making, the BGCs and CBDs and all of that, the real wages of vast majority of Philippines is not improving, just as their expectations increases. So now, unlike before, there is exposure, there's expectation,
mhm,
there's a chance to realize what they're missing in ways it was not before. So I know our conversation was about the endurance of the quote unquote liberal oligarchy,
mhm,
but isn't this eventually going to hit also a wall? And maybe that wall is much closer to our current political moment than we
mhm,
think, right?
mhm,
Because, we
mhm.
talk about it in a very evenmential way, right? Like, yeah, this drama, that drama, BBM, this. But if you look at it from a lingerie way, like, I see so many systemic deadlocks here, right? That, like, how long are people going to be okay with this? I mean, the fact that we jump from Duterte to BBM, then Tulfo, it looks like people are looking for something more and more interesting
Yeah,
clearly
yeah.
they have lost confidence in the standard forms of leadership and liberal democratic governance.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, well, as you say, it's been going on for a long time. A certain kind of pessimism and disillusionment is characteristic of Philippine politics. I can't ever think of a time when people were not pessimistic about Philippine politics. The politics of pessimism is extremely powerful force in the Philippines, which makes it ripe for the emergence of strongmen, right? If authoritarians can succeed in the country, it's because people are extremely pessimistic of the way things are going and are looking for a messianic figure. Given the largely Catholic nature of the country, messianism is an important thing. I just saw Handel's Messiah the other day, right? And two things struck me that was so typical of the Philippines. One is its narrative of the passion of Christ, he was a man of sorrow, acquainted with grief. That was one of the lines. But then towards the end, they sing Alleluia and celebrate the coming of a divine order. I mean, it's really a celebration of divine authoritarianism, is what you get in Catholicism. So Catholicism underpins so much of Philippine political culture. So on the one hand, you have this widespread pessimism. On the other hand, you have this dream of a Messiah figure, that continues to animate people. And I think that's going to persist. I don't see any changes in that,
You see
right?
that, yeah, hegemonic block again. I'm very Gramsci about this.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
reason I sorry, I'll have to ask one more question because you raised this Catholic angle. Because for me, one of the puzzles, I mean, you can easily say, yeah, but different story. But still, one of the puzzles is I find so much similarity with Latin America, right? In terms of
Hmm. Hmm.
inequality, the haciendero encomienda culture, the American Espanol, a lot of the feudalistic and modernity kind of blending into each other. But the left is far stronger in Latin America, right?
Absolutely.
The politics is far
Absolutely.
more dynamic in Latin America. The level of serious intellectual discourse from certain angles with political
Hmm.
stake,
Hmm.
because there are a lot of us doing a lot of work, right? Academic work, but is it
Hmm.
really shaping directly the discourse in the halls of power? I see that in Latin America. I just had the Foreign Minister of
Hmm.
Uruguay on my TV show. He was here in Manila the other week. We were talking about Uruguay politics. We were talking about Peruvian
Hmm.
politics, Argentina, Chile, Mexico. So why are we so different, not only from our
I'll
Asian,
tell you why. I'll
but
tell you
also
why.
from Latin American cousins?
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
so
yeah.
lonely.
I'll tell you why. If you spend enough time in places like Mexico, one of the things that impresses you is number one, how many revolutions they've had. Number two, how successful these revolutions were. Latin American revolutions have been far more successful, right? Which is why they can build up a stronger, like socialist base, right? A stronger state, for example, and so forth. Even if they have these counter revolutions, in the form of military coups and so forth and so on, right? So that's one thing. The other thing with Latin America is that they've been able to form a kind of relationship with the United States up north, right? That has made it impossible for the U.S. to just simply come in and dictate things to them. So that's that opposition to the U.S. has been very, very,
Collective, no? Like the
yeah, yeah,
UNASUR
yeah.
and all of that. Yeah.
Exact. The Philippines has never had a successful revolution. I'm sorry to say this, but it's true. I mean, regardless, I mean, Nick Joaquin, of course, was at the forefront of saying this, right? Our revolutions have failed, and that the failure of that revolution has been productive. I shouldn't say, failure is always productive because it always opens the door to other possibilities. And what has the failure of revolutions produced? It's produced this sort of upper class oligarchy that, by virtue of conniving and collaborating with colonial powers, have managed to sustain its power and have managed to solidify class hierarchy as well as a gender hierarchy in the Philippines. And that is the system that we're living with, right?
And don't you think the China element, Vicente, could introduce some interesting dynamic here? Because under Duterte, we got some intimations that, I know that was very transactional, very,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever. But who knows in 20 years when China becomes so powerful and domineering, and so
yeah.
successful as a political system, and I don't see US going in a good direction, to be honest, as things stand. That the Philippine oligarchy will splinter, and a part of that will adopt the Chinese model, kind of a essentially Lee Kuan Yew for the 21st century, right? Because it's that kind of authoritarian modernization, right? With new characteristics. I'm just wondering about that, right? Because the story of the past 100 years is the American empire,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
the story of the
Yeah.
next 100 years could be competing empires.
Yeah,
And that
well,
competing in part could splinter also our oligarchy.
yeah, no, I mean that's possible. I mean, the oligarchy is certainly not a monolithic formation, right? There are many different tendencies, but on the whole, I think the oligarchy goes after its interests, and wherever and whoever can support those interests and consolidate them, that's what they're going to go for, right? Whether it's the U.S., whether it's China, at one point it was Japan,
Japan, yeah.
et cetera, right? So I think so long as the oligarchy is allowed to conduct its businesses, its various businesses, I think they'll be fine with whoever is in the horizon, imperial horizon, right? Of course, there's a big question of whether or not China will still be there. You know, Al McCoy recently has this very interesting article about this is an era when the four major empires are collapsing. You know, France, China, the
Russia,
United
yeah.
States, yeah, and Russia, right? They're all in the process of collapse. But you know, that's Al's spiel. You don't have to agree with that, right? But there is this idea that the era of imperial domination is fast coming to an end. I don't know if I agree with that, but nonetheless, insofar as the Philippines is concerned, its global orientation has always been in two ways. One is towards empire, the other is towards overseas contract work. And it's the overseas contract work, the OFWs, that I think are just as important, you know, because they form an incredibly vital and important constituency. They are, in some ways, their experience of empire is extremely different, right, from what you get in the Philippines. So I think they're certainly worth paying attention to.
Obviously our entire conversation could easily be dismissed by some of our friends as a very elite driven understanding or elite centric understanding of history or Philippine politics. Where do you see the agency for, let's say, the middle class and grassroots civil society? I know maybe that's not necessarily your area of focus, but as someone who loves the Philippines as a
Yeah,
Filipino,
yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
is your read on agency? What's your read on middle class civil society? People like you and I, with
yeah,
the
yeah.
limited power of the pen we have, what can we do on that front?
Well, I mean, there are a number of ways in which non-elite agency manifests itself. Of course, assuming that we understand what we mean by elite, which is, you know, the ruling class, right? The people in power. Uh, One is elections. Elections are a powerful way, I think, for non-elites, middle class, poor people to participate in the governing of the country, right? That we have a modicum of democratic participation that is available by way of elections serves as a counter to the otherwise entrenched oligarchical nature of politics. Another is economics. I mean, this is why I always bring up OFWs because their ability to prop up the Philippine economy should not be underestimated. I mean, it's incredible how much, you know, the remittance economy is crucial for the survival of the country and the social effects of that remittance economy. The way they undermine, for example, all these things we've been talking about, the misogyny, the masculinity, because most of the OFWs are women, right? And so all of a sudden they
They're
control the money.
empowered, they're
They have
exposed.
power.
Yeah.
No, exactly. So OFW, you know, the remittance economy is another way in which they can participate. And then there's also social action. I mean, people have never stopped organizing. As much as labor unions have been diminished, nonetheless they keep popping up, right? So that's a third thing, you know, organizing, social action, demonstrations. And the fourth way in which, of course, non-elites participate is through the media, right? There's social media, but there's also popular culture, there's movies, there's creative arts, and so important as a way of intervening and critiquing Philippine society. So those are four things I can think of. I mean, I'm sure there are other ways in
Yeah.
which people could
Do
talk
you
about
think we need
agents.
another El Filibusterismo? Do you think we need to complete the trilogy? Because from my understanding, Rizal was looking at the trilogy, probably even in French, right? Because he was
Yeah,
competent
yeah,
enough. I saw his French letters. Should we complete that for the 21st century? Because the El Fili for me really struck home. Like, yeah, wow.
yeah,
Like the debates I see there, like, yeah, that's basically inside my mind. That's what like is this so rotten that you need something crazy? Is fascism really the only way to break the deadlock, right? I mean, you think about all of those arguments, right? Amazing
yeah,
how
Yeah.
Prescient was Rizal was, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no. I mean, yeah, you don't have to look. I mean, if you wanted to look further than Rizal, I'm a big fan of Nick Joaquin. I think,
Oh, sorry.
other
Yeah,
than,
of course. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Sorry.
yeah.
Absolutely.
There's never been. I mean, in the 20th century, Nick Joaquin, hands down, right? The most insightful, the most provocative historian, writer, intellectual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm really disappointed that no Philippine publisher has decided to put out a complete an edition of the complete works of Nick Joaquin. From his fiction to his
Exactly.
historical work to his journalism. I would love to see a complete edition of that. Other than that, there are, what you might call descendants of Nick, Doreen Fernandez, Ed Alegre, uh, of course, Rusil
Hell,
Mojares, the great historian, Rusil Mojares, right? And I'm waiting for a Philippine publisher to put out, the complete edition of these
Brazil.
writers,
Yeah.
So because the new writers that are coming up, I mean, they're okay, many of them are our friends and they're very insightful and they're a lot of fun to read. But I'm sorry to say, it doesn't have the same intellectual
Like,
heft.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
Yeah,
that kind of almost
yeah,
megalomaniac sense of grandeur, right? Very
yeah.
19th
Or
century. Yeah.
or the same kind of intellectual heft, and certainly the same kind of social effect, right? As these writers have had. So, and I think this is. I mean, I'm just waiting for Ateneo University Press or UP University Press. To sort of get their act together, and it's like in France, you have Gallimard and all these,
Yeah.
or like in the U.S. where they have the Library of America and greatest hits. Ayan, in one set, pwede mo nang bilhin yan. Parang encyclopedia. Alam mo na sa
Right.
bahay mo, your kids can read it. These are the kinds of legacies, right? Intellectual legacies that we have to start to cultivate and really look after. Ako nga, if and when I ever retire, that's one thing I would push for is that, let's get the complete works. I mean, the National Historical Institute tried to do that with Rizal in 1961. They got all their complete works. And that's a very impressive project that they did. And now it's gone. Nobody can get their hands on a lot of these Rizaliana, right?
Inenta?
Uh, huh?
Inenta? Ano man?
Yeah, hindi.
Saan?
It just a lot of them ended up lying, wasting away in their
Oh,
warehouses.
jeez.
Yeah, I used to go to thanks to Ambeth Ocampo, he directed me to the basement of the National Historical Institute, and a lot of this Rizaliana was just wasting away, being eaten by cockroaches. And you can't. I have a whole bunch of them that I took. You could buy them for 1 peso a pound, at that time.
Yeah, something
And
that's tragic. Yeah.
yeah, and ngayon wala na. And no other publisher has sought to invest, because it costs money, of course, right? And none of them have sought to invest in reviving, for example, these wonderful volumes of, result translations in Bicol, in Ilocano, etc. I even have a volume of results handwriting, samples of his
Oh, sure.
handwriting that,
Oh,
that,
wow.
that used to be around, right? The multiple volumes of his correspondences with Blumentritt in the original German, right? Wala na, you can't get them anymore. So unless you're friends with Ambeth and he has extra copies that he can give you.
Maybe we need 10 ambets, right? I think that's really the story. We need 10 ambets. We need 10 of you. And like, we really need to, I mean, I met someone, I think it was an Aussie or something. It was more about geopolitics and IR. He said, oh, you guys need 10 of you, right? Like 10 ADHD guys who are all over the place, talking to the Kissingers and talking to the, and get things. And my sense is we need the same. Um,
Yeah, and one more thing, I would appeal to someone like Lauren Legarda, who's been very
yes,
active in
good
promoting
point.
Philippine studies,
Very good
to sort
point.
of pay attention to preserving, Philippine letters and to making them
She's doing something
vastly
in fairness.
accessible. Yeah,
She's
yeah,
doing
yeah,
on the French front, on the American front.
yeah, yeah,
Sir
yeah.
Romualdez funded the Tagalog studies in Harvard and all
Yeah,
that.
but that's a PR stunt. Instead of doing that, to concentrate on reviving and preserving a lot of our legacies. You know, so
Absolutely. I don't want to keep you away from the second half of the series of 1,000, I 1,000, 100 Years of Solitude. Um, are there some books that you suggest? I'm gonna make it a bit extra client. Are there a couple of essays or books you want to suggest for people to have a kasi alam mo naman Vicente, 'di ba? Like there's the kind of a mass media understanding of Philippine politics. You know, the way radio announcers talk about, lahat kurakot. Like, there's no analysis, right? It's just descriptive. It's just whining. It's just ranting. And I'm saying, as someone who's been dealing with the media here in the Philippines for a long time, it's not analysis. I think we have wonderful
Yeah,
journalists, but what we need is analysis. So so obviously you're saying Nick Joaquin should be the starting point. Is that what you're saying? If
yeah.
if
Well,
you suggest to someone like three books or three essays.
yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, Nick Joaquin is always great. The Question of Heroes is fantastic, especially the last essay on Ricarte, which is unparalleled in my opinion. So there's Nick Joaquin, and of course, Rizal. Everybody should reread Rizal seriously and not
You,
just,
you like the
bits
Penguin
and pieces.
edition, the latest one? I really liked it. The
Yeah, well,
It
mean,
was
there are
good.
many. The best edition is the University of Hawaii edition under
Ah,
Soledad Locsin. Soledad
right,
Locsin,
right,
I think,
right.
gets results
Okay.
language just right. So, there's that. And then, Ben Anderson has written some very interesting things on the Philippines as
New Left
well.
Review, especially one. Yeah, yeah,
Right, right, right. And so there are more recent books that have come out. Younger scholars like Stephanie Mawson, who's
yeah.
also Australian, has written this wonderful book called Incomplete Conquests. There's ano pa ba? Uh, what else have I read recently that uh, there's this is wonderful book by Christy Flannery, who's also Australian, that's written about piracy and the effects of piracy in colonial culture in the Philippines. So I think that's very important. In terms of the revolution, I don't know what recently has come out on the revolution. I mean, they're the standards, the real classics. Mila Guerrero's book on the Malolos Republic. Uh, I could mention Ray Leto, who's still interesting. I mean, he's been under a lot of attacks and under a lot of criticism, and I think his book is still important.
Well, he went a bit too much on the Duterte, But he's a nice guy. I mean, I had fantastic conversation in person with him. Really honest, sincere. He dropped by my book talk back in the day at ANU. Really
Mhm.
interesting conversation. Obviously, he pushed back very strongly against the Benedict Anderson Latin
Oh,
American
sure,
nexus. He
sure.
was really on the Datu one, and I said, why
Yeah,
not
yeah,
both? Because that's my understanding. It's a hybrid. Why should it be either or? Um,
exactly, exactly.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Vicente. I really, really appreciate it because obviously a lot of my analysis here is really like, everyday punditry, political analysis.
Mhm,
Pero
mhm.
kailangan talaga natin ito eh. I mean, we really need this kind of adjust the aperture, look at it from the bird's eye view. You know what? I actually met a couple of your students. Oh, I'm so bad in it. One of your students who's now teaching in Mexico.
Jorge,
Yeah, yeah,
Jorge.
he was here. He
Yeah,
was at Asian Center. We were together because
yeah,
um
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then also doctoral student, one of your. So they were there, and we have, and he was talking about like these amazing figures, like this Peruvian called Prado,
Uh-huh,
who wanted to
uh-huh.
launch a coup in the Philippines. I mean, like
Right, right.
wild shit. I'm sorry, like there's so much wild stuff going
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah,
Man.
yeah,
That's the thing
yeah,
that
yeah,
Latinos were doing in the Philippines. Like
yeah,
we're so blind to the connectivist history. That's really what I love.
yeah,
I always love that
yeah,
connectivist history, whether it's
yeah.
Indonesia on the Philippine political left
Right,
or
right,
it's Latin
right.
America on this anti-colonial post. It's amazing, right? I think we need more of that. And in fact, in fairness, your works to a certain degree are of the
Mhm.
same. John Seidel also to a certain degree
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah,
So I think
yeah.
those are also amazing works, connectivist work. Because you won't
Right.
really understand the Philippines unless you put it in that bigger context.
That's correct. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
On
Yeah.
that note, thank you so much. You can see medyo nagbablush na ako. That's a sign na medyo exhaustion and all of that. But I really appreciate this, Vicente. I mean, this
Oh, it's
was
good.
the day
Yeah.
of historians with Leloy, sobrang kulit. With you, let me tell you, I always feel, privileged to have friends like you, Vicente.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and more power to you, my friend. And please continue
Thank
the
you. Thank
great
you.
work you're doing. Please continue to inspire people, and please continue to push the envelope and be iconic.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what I
yeah.
love about
I'd
you and
love
Lele.
to.
Both
Yeah.
of you are pasaway. It's like throw bombs once in a while. It's like
That's right. That's right.
that's
Yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's what I love because that's what I do. Like, like I just throw bombs.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
we should.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Salamat, Vicente, and let's keep in touch. Hopefully, in person, we can have the next one. Opo tayo, maybe with the Howie Severino in his place
Yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah. Maybe in the summer, we'll come visit in the summer and we
Inshallah,
can
God
do.
willing,
Yeah,
God
yeah,
willing,
yeah, yeah,
God
yeah.
willing,
Okay,
and please send my regards to your lovely wife and also my very good friend, Leila.
that's right. I'll say hello to Lila.
Of
Yeah, for
course,
you.
of
Yeah.
course. My
Okay,
prayers.
okay.
Merry Christmas. Talk to you soon.
Same to you. Same to you.
Advance
Happy
Happy New Year, my friend.
holidays. Yeah.
God
Okay.